Hello folks, Jonathan Milam here. I do hope you're having a great day. Yesterday I made a video which I simply call Flight Attendant Number 1. And it was a general job overview, nuts and bolts, just a lot of different thoughts. Today I was going to be a little more concise in my comments, and I'm going to be centering on really, I think, essentially the three types of flight attendant work there can be. First of all, you've got your mainline aircraft, which is, let's, for example, use American Airlines. American Airlines airplanes, the smallest they have is 128 seats. They have one that's about 150. They've got one that's about 178 seats. And they have some that run closer to 275, I believe, for their long-haul international flights. Their lesser flights, like if you're going from Dallas to Naples, Italy. So you're probably going to be taking a very large plane. That is definitely going to be what we would call a mainline flight attendants. If you're going from Dallas, Texas to, let's say Northwest Arkansas, then you're probably going to be taking a smaller plane. And that's where I work. That's what they call regional. So you'd work a region, like Air Wisconsin is a regional airline. It doesn't just do Wisconsin flights, but it's going to do flights that are closer to the Wisconsin area. They probably do St. Paul, Minnesota, Chicago, Detroit, but mostly centered around that area. So you've got your regionals, which is your smaller, 76 and less is the seating capacity on regional airplanes. And then for mainline, 128 and more is what you're going to be getting into. And the third area is going to be charter flights. And charter flights, you might have 3 or 4 passengers that you're babysitting, serving in an elite situation with one flight attendant. Or you could have 20 or 30 people. I did work for a charter company where we moved armed service members around. But those are the 3 areas that I wanted to discuss today. And I know more about the regional and charter work because I've worked both of those. I've been doing regional work for just about 7 years. I really like the company that I'm with. We are one of the wholly owned subsidiaries of American Airlines. And all of their smaller regional jets, they lump into largely the American Eagle banner. But within that, they do have a good number. Envoy is the name of the company that I'm with. And I'll discuss pay in just a moment. But right now, we might be starting at a higher pay scale than some of the mainline carriers, which does surprise me. Okay, regional airlines, these tend to be much easier to get into. I interviewed for United Airlines unsuccessfully and American Airlines Mainline unsuccessfully. And they told us might have told us for both of them, if you're going to start off with Mainline, you'll start off making a video of yourself. Usually you'll use a computer or camera or something like that. You'll send that in, then they'll sift through those. If they like what they see, they'll give you a phone interview or online interview. And if they like that, they'll invite you to a probably one of their hubs or main bases. And when I was lucky enough to have a face-to-face with United and Mainline, both American, and they told us it is actually easier to get into Harvard University than it is to get in this room with American Airlines. They say there's about 1.5 million people in the United States that would like to be flight attendants, and there are not 1.5 million jobs. However, with the regional airlines, it is much easier to get hired. Mainline, I feel that they have a ideal candidate, and the ideal candidate does not always have silver hair and 63 years old. Ideally, they would like somebody that's at their peak, 20s or 30s, young, vivacious looking. And that's ideally. They're not going to come out and say that. And they do hire some older people. But the bulk of their new hires are probably going to be younger people in their prime. That's just what eyeballing and statistics tells me. Regionals, like the company that I'm working with, they want someone that is dependable, and they want someone that is able to adopt their safety policies, and someone that is personable. And I seem to have fit that role. And I'm glad that I've been with them. They've treated me very, very nicely. Very nicely. Okay, now another thing that you get into, if you're going with a regional, you'll want to check out how they are for flying privileges. I worked charter work for really about a year and a half and enjoyed it enough to know I really wanted to do it, but there was no flying privileges for the family. No flying privileges for me. I was living in Houston at the time, and that's where Atlas wanted their flight attendants to be based. And but if you wanted to go to Springfield, Missouri, you're on your own. You pay for your way to Springfield, Missouri. With American Airlines, I can non-rev, and I don't have to pay for flights if I want to visit Springfield, Missouri. Why would I want to visit Springfield? I'm going to be there working tomorrow night. And that brings up another point. One difference between mainline and regional air flying is you do have more fascinating locations with mainline. For instance, I was going through TSA and I got randomed, which meant I had to go through the line with your average passenger. And there was a pilot behind me, and he was with mainline, and I'm a regional. And he said, well, where are you going today? And I said, Champaign-Urbana. And he said, oh, nice. It's about a 30-minute flight from Chicago where we were. And I said, where are you going? And he said, Paris, France. If you want to go to Paris, France, you work mainline. If you want to go to Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, then you work the regional. We do have less glamorous locations, primarily because they're secondary locations, not locations that need a 300-seat aircraft. That's not what you need to get into Champaign-Urbana. There's not that many people in the course of one flight that will want to go there. So your regionals generally have less exciting destinations. There's nothing wrong with Champaign-Urbana. There's nothing wrong with Peoria. There's nothing wrong with Evansville, Indiana. In fact, in a couple of weeks ago, I'll be doing all three of those in one sequence. One night in Peoria, one night in Champaign, one night in Evansville, Indiana. But I got to be honest with you. I would probably enjoy an overnight in Las Vegas better. But Las Vegas is a heavily traveled city, and they use the larger planes, so mainline will be going there. And the regionals usually will not. Maybe slightly lesser quality hotels, although I really can't complain about the hotels that we stay at. I do think that with regional work, we have shorter work days generally. I know we have shorter flights. However, we can do up to 5 flights a day, even sometimes all in Texas, so they're relatively quick. A 5-flight day is wearing. However, if you're doing a 3-flight day on mainline and you go from Los Angeles to New York and then New York to Miami and Miami to Atlanta, that's still a very long day. It's only 3 flights, but it's 3 very long flights. Personally, I believe that regional airlines usually have less grueling work days. I believe I mentioned earlier, it's much easier getting hired for a regional than it is for a mainline. And again, your numbers, you've got hundreds of thousands of people that are seeking jobs with the mainline. And for mainline, I talk Delta, United, and American. Only because they have regional airlines that fly under them. Southwest would certainly be considered a major air carrier in the United States, but I don't believe they have regionals that work for them, and that's why I usually qualify when I'm talking mainline. I'm usually talking United Airlines, Delta Airlines, and American Airlines. Okay, another thing is seniority comes much quicker at a regional airline than it does with a mainline. I lived in Houston. I mentioned when I got started in the air industry, and had a lady that lived a few blocks away from me. She had flown in, living in the Houston suburb that we lived in. She had flown for United for 22 years, I believe it was. 22 years. And they called her one day and they said, would you be willing to relocate to Chicago? And she laughed and she said, no, I've worked for you 22 years in Houston. My husband is retired in Houston. My children have been raised in Houston. They live here. Our grandchildren are here. I have no desire to go to Chicago. And they told her, then you will be on reserve indefinitely. And reserve means you're on call. You don't have control of your own schedule. It's not what you like. I've been with Envoy Air for 7 years, and I can almost always choose the days off that I want. I usually like to fly either Monday through Thursday or Tuesday through Friday. And actually, if I leave on Monday, I'm going to be flying Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. It's a 4-day week for me. I go in the night before so that I'm sure I'm going to catch my flight. And Envoy Air is also one of the only airline I know of. As a commuter, if you live more than 2 hours away, or more than 50 miles, I think they call it, they will give you a hotel for free the night before you start. And that way you're definitely there to fly when it is your time. If you commute in the morning of and your plane has a mechanical situation or weather drives you away, you're going to miss the start of your sequence, and they will only tolerate that so many times before they discard you. Seniority comes much faster with a regional airline. I like that. I believe I was flying a few months back, and I picked up a fellow in uniform for American Airlines, and good-looking guy, and we were talking just a little bit. And I asked him, I said, "Are you mainline?" And he said, "I was with Envoy for several years, and I just went with American Airlines." And I said, "How do you like it?" And he said, "I hate it." And I said, "Really?" I said, "You've got better destinations. You probably have better hotels. You've got larger crews. What's not to like?" And I think basically he had gone from having a line, which was what we call it when you have enough seniority to choose at least the days that you travel and so on. He'd gone back to reserve when he progressed up to a higher paying mainline job. And he just did not like it. And felt bad for him, but I'll be staying at Envoy until I quit flying. I simply have no desire to go mainline and go on reserve for an extended length of time. Just no desire for that. Now, one other thing, if you're with a regional, they're going to have less bases. Like American has probably 6 or 7, and I'll actually read them off in a moment, 6 or 7 bases that they work, or hubs as they call it. Same thing with United and Delta. Your regionals, we have 4 hubs. We have hubs or bases in Chicago, Dallas, Phoenix, and Miami. And strangely, I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I commute into Dallas. Miami is closer, but it's harder for me to get there. Less direct flights with seat capacity that I need. Chicago is closer, but it's easier for me to commute into Dallas because there's more mainline planes with open seats. So we do have less bases. We also have smaller bases. American has, I believe, 26,000 mainline flight attendants. And your manager will never know you in all likelihood unless you have major problems, and then they'll know you very well. But in your smaller bases, it's a lot more of a knowing relationship. My managers at Envoy have treated me extremely well. I have had a few instances where I had to go out on leave. I actually had my Achilles tendon pull my heel apart, and I had to get off of my feet for about 6 weeks. Envoy treated me fantastic. However, I believe they know that when I'm able, I give my best for them, and they honor me with respect and work with me when I do have any physical challenges. Okay, so that's it for regional airlines, smaller bases. Our pay is $28 an hour. Our starting pay at Envoy Air, we are regional again for American Airlines. I just read today that Delta's starting wage, I read, is $19 an hour. Now, they do give you rapid bump ups, and their average flight attendant pay is $36. Your regionals generally start you at about $20 an hour and go usually up to about $35 as the max, where Mainline, if you stick it out for enough years, you will be making more money. Okay, I mentioned with Mainline flight attendant jobs, that's with Delta, American Airlines, United, they can be a very hard job to get. Very hard. Seniority takes a long time to develop. I mentioned a lady that had been at United for 22 years. They asked her to move to another base, and when she chose not to, the way things work, the way they do their flights, they didn't need her as much at Houston as they needed her in Chicago. So she went back on a reserve status. Real bummer. Okay. Pay is generally better. Now, a pay indication, I'll mention this. I'd started with Envoy Air and was making about $20 an hour, and this was 5 or 6 years ago. And there was a lady that was traveling with me. She had on a nice uniform. I chatted with her a little bit. In fact, we had a weather problem, and we were flying from Cleveland, Ohio to Kennedy in New York City, and weather made us stop off in either Rochester or Buffalo, New York. Really bad weather. A storm just centered over Kennedy, New York City, and would not move. So we were talking for a while, and I said, well, where are you going to go when you get to Kennedy? And she said, well, I'm doing a trip to Madrid, Spain. And I said, really? How much are you going to make for that? And she figured for a minute. She's mainline, so she's making more money. She was going to do an international flight, and there was a little bonus attached to that. She was going to be the lead, the number one. She was going to work first class. There's a little more work there, so she got a little more for that. She figured it all out, and she told me, she said, I will be making $69 an hour on this trip. And I looked at her and said, I'm making just over $19 an hour. So that's what you get with Mainline. You're not always going to be making 69, and you're going to have to work a long time before you make 69. But to my way of thinking, that's good money. And the international flights are certainly, at least your destination is picturesque. The drawback is you're going to be working mostly all night long. And I've done that before when I did charter work. I did not like flying all night long and working all night long. I enjoy the regional work much better. Okay, American Airlines has hubs. They've got more bases than the regionals do. American Airlines has hubs in Charlotte, Chicago, Dallas-Fort Worth, Los Angeles, Miami, New York, Philadelphia, Phoenix, and Washington, D.C. Online, they say their starting pay is about $27,000 a year. That's a rough approximate. United Airlines has bases in Chicago O'Hare, Denver, Guam, Houston Intercontinental, Los Angeles, Newark, San Francisco, and Washington Dulles. Starting pay, they say, is around $24 an hour. The average, they say, at a United Airlines is $32 an hour. And actually, I think that's probably a little low, but that's nonetheless what I gleaned from the internet. Delta Airlines has bases in Atlanta, Boston, Detroit, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, St. Paul, New York, Kennedy, and LaGuardia, Salt Lake City, and Seattle. And this says the starting pay for Delta as of just a few months ago was $19 an hour. I want to say again, Envoy is starting at $28 an hour. That's the regional that I work with. And the average pay, Delta Airlines says, is about $36 an hour. Well, Maybe there's not that much difference in pay between your regionals and your mainlines after all. The third area of work that you have an option for is charter work. I mentioned when I was with Atlas, they'd fly us to El Paso, usually get us a hotel. Then we'd get up in the morning and starting probably around noontime, we might pick up soldiers at Bliss, I believe is the Army base there. Then we might fly to Louisville and we might pick up soldiers there, 40 or 50 at each location. We might go down to the edge of Charlotte and pick up some soldiers, and then we would fly them over to Germany, and that's our big overnight flight. When we'd get to Germany, we would usually wait for a few hours, and then they would either let us stay in Germany for a few days with international flying. That's generally what they do, so you can get your sleep in. And then we would either go down to Bahrain in the Middle East, or maybe Qatar, some of those cities, and then we would fly back to Germany usually, and then back to the United States. Take about a week for the whole thing. That was the charter work that I experienced primarily with Atlas. I think I was 17 or 18 different locations in Europe in my first year. Fascinating, wonderful to be able to see all of the history there. But when you're in Germany, you're a long way from your family in the United States. You want to call and talk to them? Well, it's 3 in the morning, when it's noon in Germany. You've always got those time zone shifts when you're doing international work. I found it much more wearing, and frankly, I did not enjoy the large crews as much as I like the regional flying where I fly by myself or occasionally, generally now, with one other flight attendant. I just enjoyed that more, less chaos. Everyone knows exactly what they're doing, and I found it more enjoyable. Charter work, I know there are flight attendants that they'll work one airplane, they are by themselves. They might have 3 or 4 people on board, they might have 15 or 20, and they might be flying from Charleston, South Carolina to Los Angeles, and then wait a day and then bring some people back from Los Angeles to Charleston or wherever they're going. Some of those charter flight attendants are also responsible to figure out the fuel that's needed. They're responsible for pre-ordering the beverages for the in-flight service and the snacks or meals that are involved as well. And that charter work where you're working completely by yourself, that's just very different. The charter work that I did, we're usually doing 150, 175 armed servicemen that would be going over to Europe or else to, say, Okinawa, Japan, something like that. Occasionally would do Korea. And that was the type charter work that I did, large groups of people. But you do have your options as well where you work pretty much by yourself. I would think that those charter jobs where you're working by yourself would probably be going to people that have already got flight attendant experience. All right. Hope this helps you as we've tried to differentiate some of the differences between regional work, mainline work, and charter work. We love the comments. We love the questions. Any items that you'd like us to cover in the future, we certainly will try. This is it for number 2 in our overview of the flight attendant. Take care of yourself and someone near you.